that February, in terms of doing a thematic month, worked pretty well for me actually. It was a case of having a 6-book TBR, reading all those 6 books, but then also reading 3 more books within that month, which fitted the theme to some extent and also pushed the theme's boundaries, I guess, in a way that was really interesting and a way that I really should make a video about, but I'm not sure if I will yet or not because it takes a lot of time to do all this stuff. I made a list of possible themes, and then as each month draws nearer, I'm just choosing the theme that I guess speaks to me the most. For this month, I have chosen the theme of craft. If that sounds just like really weird, guess it's going to be a bit difficult to explain, but this month is going to be focused on the craft of writing and reading books through the lens of them as a craft, or as them being something that has been crafted. So what that ultimately means is actually for this month I've got a much smaller TBR. I do actually have 5 books here, but mainly I have 3 novels, and those 3 novels are going to be rereads. So I think that was important for me in deciding these books, is that I wanted to reread something because I'm going to be spending more time with them. When I read something for the first time, I would much prefer to just be in that book, in the novel, not worry about having to consider parts, not having to worry about measuring the writing in any way except for what I'm feeling at that time, and I like to be kind of swept through the story and not have to worry about anything else. Whereas this month I want to take books I am comfortable with and I know well enough and I have in the past loved, and I want to sort of like then take my time with them now, having that knowledge of hindsight whilst analysing them through the lens of craft or through the theme of craft. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense, because I don't really know how else to really explain it. One of the reasons I've wanted to do this theme for this month is that actually I've been working on writing my own book, as have many other people, and it's got to a point where I have planned and plotted a scene by scene kind of take on what I want to happen. This is just my kind of writing style for this book actually, don't think I've done this before. And I thought it would be nice to examine books that I've liked and books that I think my work could be seen as a dialogue with. Not that my story is inspired by these books, and not that my story is kind of well, I guess it's kind of similar, but it's similar in the way that it's almost as if you imagine literature as a dialogue, you have various different conversations, and you'll get a picture of what I mean later on in this video. So they are, I guess in some way my book might reference these texts. Kind of wanted to see how these different conversations were crafted, and in how my book can become a part of that conversation, or ideas that I can learn as a writer about the craft of making a story, and how I can then apply that to my own writing. So I'm just going to kind of hang that in the air and hope that you as human beings can interpret my meaning and apply it to the rest of this video, because I don't think I'm doing a very good job of that. So I'm just going to start with the first book. This is probably the most recent book that I have read. I read it last year at the end of the year, made my top 10 books, and that is Strange Weather in Tokyo. This book is about a woman in her 30s, I think, who meets a professor that she had at high school, or perhaps university, I can't quite remember. And now that they're later in life, they have a different take on who each other are, and they kind of get to know each other in their new selves or their future selves, and throughout it a sort of relationship is developed, and it's a very slow paced, unique, quirky exploration of a different kind of relationship that you might think. It is a romance, but it's also very anti-romantic, and it just feels very dreamy and very something. I don't know what, but it's very sparse in its writing, and that's something that I think I wanted to examine. It's very sparse, it's very simple, but it also has these quirks. And I might reread the Nakano Thrift Shop alongside this one to kind of like compare and contrast two books by the same author, but this is the one I'm going to be mostly focusing on, just because I think it can offer something which made a big impact on me post-reading it, but in reflection, I'm intrigued as to how it managed to do that when it was such a short story, very bare in its sort of writing style, very kind of simple and yet very moving at the same time. So I think when I imagine looking at this book for this month, it's definitely going to be understanding or attempting to understand how Hiromi Kawakami managed to do that within this book. So then I guess going in anti-chronological order, the book that I most recently read before that one, does that make sense? Is Number 9 Dream by David Mitchell. This book is set in Japan. It follows a Japanese boy who, at the start of the story, he is trying to find his father, and he's trying to understand his place in the world whilst also trying to understand his father. And then as the story progresses, it's more about him understanding family, I guess, and him finding his own place in the world through his new family that he kind of makes himself. There's a whole lot more to it. This book is something else because it's kind of split into 9 parts, but we can mainly focus on 8 parts. So the first 8 parts split into 2, I guess. Each part kind of has like a dual narrative almost, or each part has like something weird going on with it, in which blurs the sort of line between reality and make-believe. And there's something very special about the way that David Mitchell has managed to craft a story that has so many different narratives going on, and these narratives then bend the concept of genre, but they're all very concurrent and they make sense when you're reading it, even though at first you are a bit like jolted, you're a bit like, oh, what's happening here? But I think you fall into it very easily, and I think that's what I want to kind of look at through this book, is that how can he tell a very simple story in a very complex way, but still then manage to rein it in as being something very simple. I think for me, that was just something that took my breath away when I was reading this book for the first time. I was just like, wow, this is a very well-written text in that there is so much going on, but it feels at the same time that it's not a whole lot is going on. So I think, that's something that I really want to do within this month, and when I analyse it or when I do a sort of a deep reading of it, I want to kind of understand how Mitchell managed such a feat. And then the third novel that I plan on reading, and this one I haven't read for possibly 6 or so years. I think I read it when I was at university, and that's Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. This book is a romance sort of take on the romance genre, and it follows a man who is in love with a woman who has her own sort of mental health issues, and then he's swept up in the sort of the student rebellions in Tokyo in, was it the 60s, I want to say, and kind of his own story, whilst also understanding what relationships mean with 2 very different kinds of relationships, with 2 very different women, and then kind of understanding the way that we as people coming of age kind of learn to love in different ways. But anyway, what I was most curious about was not only revisiting a book that I loved a long time ago, and seeing whether I will still enjoy it, but I also want to take a look at this sort of romantic genre being done in a different way, similar to how Strange Weather in Tokyo manages a romance in a different, quirkier way. I want to look at it from a completely different method of doing that. But also what I wanted to do was that this book and Number 9 Dream are a conversation with each other. You can tell how Mitchell was, I guess, inspired by Haruki Murakami. You can tell that there are links between these two books, not only because of the title. Norwegian Wood is a Beatles song and Number 9 Dream is a John Lennon song, so there's that kind of link just from the front cover. So that, and then throughout the text, I seem to have this memory through reading this one that there are sort of slight references not only to Norwegian Wood but to Murakami's other works that kind of demonstrate kind of this whole idea of how literature can be a conversation, and how authors, whilst never directly talking to or never directly mentioning another book, can be in conversation with another book and another person's work. And I think that's something I also want to look at within these books, because that's how I have imagined I would like to understand my place in writing and my place in a sort of a conversation or a dialogue with other people's works. So while these three books they feel very Japanese in the way that they are writing and the style that they are writing, and that's something that I want to look at, is the sort of the evolution of, I guess, Japanese literature and how that has led us to these sort of books, because we need to remember that David Mitchell lived in Japan for a very long time, and I think that was a big factor in his learning to tell stories. So I want to kind of look at it from that way, and then understand my own place in, I guess, a more British context. Even though I'm looking at Japanese books, it makes sense in my head. It doesn't make sense at all in this video, I'm sure, but it makes sense in my head. So I'm just going to kind of glaze over that and go into the next two books I have, and they are both plays. So we have Enjoy by Tashiki Okada and The Sonic Life of a Giant Tortoise by Tashiki Okada. Now I picked these up because I think these two plays have very similar themes to these three books in very different ways. So they all are in my head, from the synopsis, both these plays have been attached somehow to these books, and I wanted to examine plays as part of this theme of craft, because writing a play is very different to writing a novel. You're of course writing a very shorter text, and you're telling a story through dialogue. And I think for me as a writer, the thing I struggle the most with is dialogue. So what better way to learn how to write decent dialogue than reading a play, whilst also examining similar themes and perhaps similar conversations with the three books that I plan on reading the most deeply this month. So The Sonic Life of a Giant Tortoise is a play about kind of, I guess, dreams. One of our characters dreams of having a dead girlfriend. He doesn't want his girlfriend to be dead, and he doesn't want to kill her, he doesn't want her to die, but he thinks that his life might have more meaning if he had a dead girlfriend. I think it just sounds like a really surreal, really trippy take on the human experience and the dream, which relates to Number 9 Dream. The blurring between dreams and reality, and when do they cross, and how can we enact dreams within our reality, etc. That just sounds really, quirky and fun and interesting, and the title itself is enough to sell me. Whereas this book, Enjoy, is a play about some men who work in a video game shop, I think, and then they have a new female co-worker, and it's just about the way that the woman impacts these men's lives and, I guess, changes their lives, makes them kind of open their eyes to a reality that's different to the one that they've probably created for themselves, whilst enclosing themselves in a very masculine or very male-dominated bubble. So I don't know a whole lot of what's going to happen, but I just think that that's going to be an interesting perspective to look at through this story. And I think it also relates very much to Murakami's book, but also to Hiromi Kawakami's book, even though that they both tackle the female body and the female character in a very different way. I'll be interested to see how this play tackles the female. So I guess that's going to be my month ahead. I am of course going to be reading other books for fun throughout this month, and I've already started reading one which isn't this TBR. And there's the sort of books that I'm going to just be reading before bed and whatnot, whereas these books I might take time to actually sit down at a table with a notebook and read. So we'll see how this month goes. We'll see how the videos go. They're obviously going to be very different to last month, and the experience is going to be very different to last month. But I'm excited to see how it happens, and if it happens, and how well I do, and what I learn from it. So I'll see you next time for another video. Bye bye.